following story is recounted by 79-year-old Gerald Turris, a man claiming to have experienced a weird winged creature in Illinois during the winter of 1957. I realize this story is a little late, but I never knew who to tell my story to until I came across an article about a man who saw a Birdman at O'Hare Airport. I'm 79 years old now, and this happened a long time ago. It was around 1957 when I was with my late brother Gene and his late brother-in-law. We were hunting in the Braidwood, Illinois area for pheasants and rabbits. As we were walking in this large open field, there was a lone large tree standing in the middle of the field. When we were directly under it, a huge man-sized creature sailed over our heads in the woods and across the road. We were stunned. We just looked at each other, too dumbfounded to speak. I was a young teenager at the time, and it was early wintertime. The time of day was mid-morning. The winged creature had the body of a large man with legs, but it was covered over the whole body with dark, tan-colored feathers. This happened so long ago, I don't recall what the face looked like. I'm just glad to tell this story to someone who has knowledge of such creatures before I die. Lon Strickler of Phantoms and Monsters spoke to witness Floyd R. Hancock, who described a terrifying encounter with a tall winged humanoid that he had as a young child in Rolling Prairie, Indiana, on October 27th, 1969. Hancock states that he and his family, a mother, father, sister, and grandmother, were living in a trailer situated on the family's land. The trailer had sustained damage on the roof, leaving a large hole. The hole was covered with a wide waterproof tarp until it was to be repaired. He and his baby sister shared a bedroom. He was awakened by a strange noise and a strong, disagreeable odor. As he looked towards his sister's crib, he saw a tall winged humanoid staring down at her. The being slowly turned and looked at a horrified Hancock. The creature was described as being very tall, between 7 and 8 feet in height, and its body and face covered in black hair. Its posture was crouched, and it had huge leathery wings, shaped like those of a bat or a gargoyle, with muscular arms and legs. The creature's body and face were thin, and it looked like a human skeleton with sharp teeth and dark eyes. It made a low, garbled sound. Hancock screamed in order to alert his parents in the adjoining room, but they never responded. His grandmother, however, was alerted and came to his aid, though she was stunned at the sight and immediately fell to her knees. The creature picked up Hancock in his arms and made its way into the living room, where it ascended through the hole in the ceiling. It's obvious it had moved the tarp in order to gain access inside the trailer. He remembers being very cold and wet, and hearing his grandmother screaming as a winged humanoid took off into the sky. He has no idea how long he was gone, but only remembers waking in his bed, among his panicked parents and grandmother. Hancock states that his grandmother witnessed the entire event and documented it. His living relatives concur with the account, since his grandmother recalled what had happened to each of them. His grandmother passed away in 1985. The witness's parents had apparently been put into some type of hypnotic trance during the abduction. Hancock's parents woke after the abduction. It seems that they were somehow placed into a hypnotic state until the winged being left the premises with him. After several minutes, they all heard scratching noises and a loud thud on the roof. His father immediately gained access to the roof, where he saw Floyd lying unconscious. They were able to quickly bring him into the trailer, dry him off, and place him in his bed. They were reluctant to call the authorities or seek medical assistance because of such a bizarre event. The effects of the abduction event had lifelong consequences, though. Hancock recovered but has endured emotional problems his entire life, which he attributes to the abduction. At the time of the Mothman Prophecies film release, he had a mental breakdown after watching it in a theater. He literally had to leave during the scene where the Mothman caused the automobile crash and death. He has not attempted to watch the film since then. I asked Hancock why he called me, Lon Strickler said. He stated that he had received a call from his cousin, who was aware of the winged humanoid sightings in Indiana. That's when he was given my contact information. I'm in the process of contacting his relatives in order to corroborate his account, Strickler continued. He seemed very forthright, but quite nervous. He seemed relieved that there had been other eyewitnesses to a similar winged being. 60-year-old retired police officer David Ramos states that in 1971, at the age of 12, he himself encountered a shadowy winged humanoid near the North Branch of the Chicago River. Ramos served as a police officer in Chicago's 14th District from 1994 to 2009. When I was a kid, about 12 years old in Chicago, we used to live near Old Riverview Park. A bunch of us boys were playing around near the banks of the North Branch of the Chicago River, throwing rubble concrete from where they demolished a park into the river, just making big splashes. I didn't like being too close to the water, so while the others were down by the riverbank, I went up to the path again by myself. I looked northward, and I swear I saw a very tall, skinny man who was very dark on the path, about 200 feet away. He glanced my way and threw his arms up, and he had wings, and he ran and flapped them and disappeared into the trees towards the bank. I was petrified right there, and I looked around, but my friends were looking south and still playing around. I said, "Did you guys see that guy?" I wasn't sure if I was seeing a guy pranking us or what. It was always spooky by the river, even in broad daylight, where they demolished Riverview. I tried to explain, but my friends told me to shut up and didn't pay any attention to me. Probably since I was just smaller and younger than them. I'm now 60 years old, and a retired Chicago police officer living in Florida, and I never told anybody else until I saw the article just now, and it shocked the expletive out of me. I too got the feeling of something evil that day, and I wanted to go home immediately. In a follow-up email, he added additional details. I tried to get a look at his face when he glanced my way. Back then, I thought he had like a scary Halloween mask on or something. There was no focal point for me because it was not a human-type face. Big eyes was the thing that I remembered, and it still creeps me out to this day. I tried to remember if something bad happened to any of us shortly after that, and I just remembered that one of the older boys that we were with that day shot and killed a rival gang member shortly after that sighting. He was 16 at the time, and he went to jail at 17 for at least 5 years for murder. Investigator Tobias Whalen was able to contact Ramos over the phone for an interview. There was a path above the water, about 5 feet above the water on a slope. I wasn't too comfortable being down there with these guys throwing concrete all over the place. I thought it was pretty dangerous, so I went up the embankment to the path, said Ramos. It was a fall day. In Chicago, it's always very gray. It's not too sunny or anything like that, but it was still daytime. I was by myself on the path, and I looked down there, and there was a tall black figure walking. He looked like he had a cape on. He was north of me, about 200 feet. He was like a big, tall man with a cape on. He looked 7 feet tall. He was facing north away from me, and I don't know if he sensed me or whatever, but he looked back in my direction, and I just couldn't make out a face. I was like, where's his face? I mean, I couldn't make out a face, but I noticed he had big eyes, like he had goggles on or something. They were yellowish red. He threw up his right hand, and there was a wing. It was huge. He ran north a few steps, started beating his wings, and went up into the trees. I was looking for a regular face, but it didn't have a face. Or maybe it was too dark to see it, but it looked like he had goggles on. I can't explain that. I was expecting this thing to be a man, but it turned around and, well, it wasn't. It wasn't a man. I never went back again. They built one of our stations right over there, the 19th District. That's where we used to exchange our cars and have our cars serviced. Even as a policeman, going over there for that, I still remembered that day, and it was very creepy. It stuck with me forever. I would like to report secondhand what my dad saw in 1976. I was 14 at the time. I grew up in Waukegan. My dad worked part-time nights at Victory Memorial Hospital, which I believe is located along Sheridan Road. After work one night, he went to help a friend who had car trouble at the Marathon restaurant, which was located along the train tracks by Johnson Outboard Motor Company, right on Lake Michigan. It was a full moon. They were in a parking lot where my dad was giving the guy's car a jump, when my dad, as he often told it, suddenly felt scared, as if something was watching them. There were 2 or more very tall silos there, or some such structure. They were probably 3 stories high, and as Dad looked up, in the moonlight, he saw a black figure crouched down, watching them. It had glowing red eyes, and he told his friend to look so they both saw it. Dad said the creature was probably around 6 feet tall because it was so high up, and even from that angle, it looked large. It definitely wasn't a bird or anything he had ever seen before. Dad said he sensed it was evil, and he removed the jumper cables, and he and his friend took off in Dad's car. They didn't even bother to lock up his friend's car. They were that frightened. As they drove off, they heard a loud, what can only be described as a swooshing sound, and then something seemed to hit and slide across the top of my dad's car. He kept going, convinced that thing was trying to drive them off the road. The next day, Dad was freaking out because you could see 3 long scratches on the roof of the car. I saw them myself. They were about 1/4 inch apart. There were 4 of them, and it looked like the talon of a large bird had scratched a car. From that point on, I was banned from going to the lake after dark, and my dad didn't even like me going there during the day either. I had never heard of reports of winged creatures until I read your article, so I just had to share. An eyewitness came forward, claiming they had a powerful experience in their youth with a being that fits this description of more than a few modern reports of flying humanoid out of Chicago. The witness, who I'll just call M, claims their encounter took place in Cicero, Illinois in 1981 when he was 13 years old. The witness M contacted me by email and asked to speak by telephone, Strickler said. I instantly had the sense that this interview would be significant, so I requested M call me at his earliest convenience, and we were talking within 10 minutes. M introduced himself and immediately started to tell me his account. He prefaced his story by saying that he had not known of the winged humanoid sightings reported throughout the Chicago metro area until he stumbled upon an article 2 days prior. He was stunned by the revelations in the article. Dozens of sightings that closely resembled his encounter in Cicero in 1981. But M's narrative was different because this encounter with this winged humanoid altered his overall beliefs and perspective of the world. M was a 13-year-old boy in 1981 who, through his own description, had suffered terrible abuse during his young life. On this particular evening, like many previous evenings, he sought solitude in his backyard. For whatever reason, he was able to employ a self-taught form of meditation that helped him cope with the abuse by his parents. As he sat on the grass, he entered into a deep level of spiritual awakeness that had become more heightened than he had ever remembered. He soon became aware of an unknown presence. As he exited his meditative state, he immediately noticed a pair of intense red eyes staring back at him from across the alleyway. The being was standing against the neighbor's white garage about 75 feet from where M was sitting. It was a thin black human shape that stood 7 feet in height when compared to the 4-foot-high chain-link fence at the end of his yard. There were wings folded on its back that extended above its long, thin head, but those intense red eyes captured M's concentration to the point where he was literally paralyzed and frozen in place. The being was soon communicating with M in a telepathic form, more intent in garnering his attention than actually expressing information. The 5 to 7 minute experience was suffused with an assortment of emotions that ranged from tranquility to terror. M recognized that he was not dreaming or in a reflective state. This was actually occurring. That was the moment where his perspective of the world changed forever. He never forgot the encounter, and it influenced his life. Though he was reluctant to disclose the incident until he started college, and became part of an environment that would pay attention to what he had to say and not judge his experience. But M still did not understand why he was the recipient of the winged humanoid's scrutiny. Then, one evening, while he and his wife were watching a video, M began to appreciate and grasp what had happened to him in 1981. The Mothman Prophecies is a theatrical film that was released in 2002. It's based on John Keel's book by the same title, even though the movie never really captured the full intensity of the book, or the actual events that occurred in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Nonetheless, the film gave an overall impression of the story and some of the narrative that Keel expressed in the book. M told me that he was sitting at home watching the video when the car accident scene unfolded. The winged being suddenly came into focus, and M instantly went into sheer panic and uncontrollably burst into tears. His wife tried to comfort him, but he was beyond consolation. They continued to watch the video, but it was a terribly difficult experience for M. Later that evening, he disclosed his boyhood encounter in detail with his wife. Since that time, he has not talked to anyone about the incident until we talk today. I would also like to state that my interview with M was one of the most insightful I've ever experienced during my time as an investigator, Lon Strickler said of the experience. We connected on a rare level, to the point where I could literally predict what he was going to say to me in each sentence. His experience confirmed to me that this phenomenon is not that of an indigenous being, but instead, a flesh and blood extra-dimensional or extraterrestrial entity that is either attracted to certain persons or summoned by specific forces. M had no previous inclination of my theories, but rather defined what I have begun to believe during the course of the investigation. He also brought up, and totally discounted, the general speculation by many that this was a harbinger of future events. I asked M if he thought that, while he was in a state of meditation, that the being could have possibly been a self-manifesting thought form. He believes that, in his case, the being sought him out because of the abuse he had suffered through his parents, as he began to read the recent sightings in the Chicago metro area. He formulated that there may indeed be more than one winged being, and that many of the witnesses came upon it by happenstance. But he also feels that some of the encounters occurred because the being sought out the witness for a specific reason. M didn't sense that the winged humanoid was evil, but believes that it's an ancient being that has sought out others in the past, and that it is the venerable entity that people have since referred to as a demon. The National Cryptid Society received a report in May of 2018 from a man in Indiana who said he'd encountered a flying creature with glowing red eyes in 1987. Since then, he said the creature has continued to appear sporadically. I was out walking late at night a couple miles out of town, near some cornfields, when I had a unsettling feeling, a feeling of being watched. I turned my head to peer into one of the fields of corn, and I heard a rustle. Quickly, I hurried my pace and tried to make it back to my house, but while I was hurriedly jogging back, something flew in front of me, and it had glowing red eyes. It made a horrible screeching noise, and I was practically sprinting at that point. I've lived around these parts for decades, and I've never seen something like that. Sometimes, even now, late at night when I'm walking around that same area, I'll see something in the dark with those same glowing red eyes, and I'll book it. In a follow-up interview, the witness described the creature as a 5 to 6 foot tall and human-like, with a wingspan of 8 to 9 feet. Admittedly, it was dark, and the witness did not have a flashlight, so details beyond the being's general shape are scarce, but, except for one, its glowing red eyes. The fact that the creature's eyes would glow red in the absence of direct light indicated that there could be something paranormal about it. Normally, the appearance of glowing eyes, or eye shine, are caused in nocturnal animals by light reflecting from the inner surface of the eye and out through the pupil. But this requires a direct light source. It's what causes a deer's eyes to glow in the headlights, for instance. Over the course of summer of 2018, the witness was asked for further details regarding his initial encounter, specifically what he felt. I felt confusion and then fear when I saw the red eyes. I had never seen anything like it, and I was not sure what it was at first. But then, I was sure that it was not something I was familiar with. The man said he's seen the creature, quote-unquote, easily over a dozen times since his first encounter in 1987. Often around fall, but not exclusively so. And his last encounter was only a few months ago. Last time this happened, I decided it was time to give my old bones a stretch a few months ago. So, I went on a walk around dusk, he said. As it got darker, I had the feeling I was being watched, and I was beginning to feel a bit spooked. When I went to head back, I saw out of the corner of my eye those bright red eyes for a second before they flashed away. After that, I walked back as fast as I could. I believe I'm seeing the same creature, because there is something so distinct about the glowing of the eyes and the uneasiness it causes me to feel, said the witness. I don't know why I always see it. It never seems to want to harm me, as it has had many chances to do so, but I still feel frightened by it. I don't know if I know exactly what it is, but I do not think it is necessarily evil, although I am uneasy by it. I also do not know why I've seen it so many times or what it wants from me, but I think it's something old. I'm not sure what to make all of this, but I am glad I've had these experiences, because I feel not many have. Lon Strickler received a pair of reports recently from the late 90s that describe a demonic flying gargoyle seen in Illinois. The first report took place in Rock Island, Illinois, in 1997. Rock Island is around 160 miles west of Chicago, near the border between Illinois and Iowa. I am now 32, and this story is coming out of Rock Island, Illinois, about 3 hours from Chicago. In about the year 1997, I remember my mom having to work third shift. She asked me to run out to the car and get something for her before she went to work. This was about 9 or 10 p.m., and all of a sudden, I heard something make a big whoosh sound that sounded like ginormous wings right above my head. So, I looked up at a street light across the street from our house. But that night, the light wasn't on, it went out. So I remember looking up, and all of a sudden, I seen a figure with red eyes looking back at me, and it was just sitting there, and I could tell it had huge wings down at its side. I ran back in the house and told my mom that I had just seen this thing out there, and I told her what it was. I don't know if she believed me or not, but she was like, "That ain't nothing but the devil after your ass." So, I was scared. After that, I went to my room and laid down, and all of a sudden, I heard the whooshing sound by my window. I can't remember if I had seen anything or not. I just heard the sound again, and I was terrified. I just closed my blinds, turned my TV on, and fell asleep. Whatever I seen that night, I don't know if they call it a devil or what, but it was real. I remember it probably being about 5 feet tall, and the wings had to be pretty large because I remember when it was looking at me from on top of the light pole, its wings were kind of like hanging down, as if it was wrapped up, and they looked pretty big. From that day on, I believe all the sightings that I've been hearing about were true, and I've been hearing about it for years. I called the witness, and she described the incident in detail, Strickler said. She stated that it reminded her of a gargoyle, and that the eyes were quite bright, and that there were small protrusions, or horns, on the head. It seemed that the incident still bothers her to this day. Very believable. And the second report is from the Naperville area, only 25 miles west of Chicago, and took place roughly 20 years ago. I was a senior in high school, taking a late night ride with my boyfriend near his house. We were sneaking out to have a cigarette, and as we were driving along a street, slowly with both windows completely down, he had a Mustang and didn't want to wake the neighborhood with his loud exhaust. We heard a loud screech in the distance. We looked at each other and confirmed that we had both heard the same thing. He slowed down to a complete stop to listen. All of a sudden, coming from the left side of the driver's side of the front windshield, appeared this gargoyle-like thing. It was about 4 feet in length, with wings, front claws, and reptilian-like skin, and big glowing eyes. The color is hard to remember. It was almost transparent, like purple. As it flew in front of the windshield, literally over the car's hood, it stopped suddenly and proceeded to scare the shit out of both of us. Its eyes protruded from its head, and it made a snarling-like gesture. It definitely was trying to scare us. It then flew off, or disappeared, and this happened so quickly. The adrenaline in our veins pumped instantly from the fright. Immediately after the thing flew off, I looked to the left at my boyfriend, and every hair on both of his arms was standing straight up. Again, we both confirmed what we had both seen, and we were bewildered. 20 years later, I still wonder what we had seen. I've researched on my own on the net, and I've found what I had witnessed has possibly been seen and may be still out there. This sighting makes me a believer that there is another dimension that we cannot see, and it sometimes shows its face. This thing, this entity, was not nice. It was demonic, and it used its power over us to scare us beyond anything that I've ever felt before. I drive by the location all the time. I live near it. The location is near a wooded area and a subdivision, and, get this, an abbey and monastery. The land that we were traveling on, and also the wooded area, perhaps it lived in, was once land owned by the abbey. Is there a connection? I would love to know. In 1999, a woman in Rockford, Illinois, claimed that she witnessed a flying red-eyed gargoyle along with her husband and a girlfriend. The incident occurred during the summer, in the early evening when there was a full moon. The trio was relaxing on the friend's front porch, which was located on Willard Avenue, near Auburn High School and Cottonwood Airport in Rockford, Illinois. During a conversation, the friend stopped talking and began to stare across the street. The witness looked in the same direction and noticed a dark grayed winged humanoid slowly flying near a large tree. She stated that it seemed like the being was in slow motion as it glided toward the tree. The friend said, "Do you see that?" The witnesses were close enough to notice that it had small cat-like ears and intense red eyes. There were no other facial features visible. It was quite muscular throughout the body and had 2 defined legs, with arms that attached to the wings. She stated that the winged humanoid was 7 feet in length, with a wide wingspan. The wings were like those of a bat, with a leather-like membrane. Apparently, the being perched in the tree, but, again, took flight. And this is when the witness's husband took notice. The winged being was gliding towards a pair of large pine trees, as its legs were kicking up and down while in flight. The being flew between 2 pine trees, and then suddenly vanished. The witness just said, "Gargoyle," and her friend acknowledged, "Yeah, a gargoyle." After the incident, the witness stated that they seemed to have forgotten the encounter until a year later when she asked her friend if she remembered the sighting. Her friend said she had, but had also forgotten the incident. Similar to other sightings, the witness was led to make a report after seeing that others had already come forward with their experiences. The witness's son told her about the recent reports and suggested that she call me, Strickler said. He was also aware of the winged humanoid sightings in the Chicago area. Contacting the witness by phone, she repeated the story told to Strickler, with no variation or embellishment. The witness did add that a friend of hers had told her, after hearing her story, that she had once seen a quote-unquote big bat hanging upside down from a tree near Rockford's Nelson Bridge. Ultimately, the witness was unsure of exactly what she had seen in 1999. "People ask me if it could have been a demon," she said. "I don't know. I don't know what I saw, but I'll never forget it." I came across your post on my Facebook timeline, and it automatically brought back some rather scary, yet crazy memories of a run-in with what everyone has been recently seeing in the Chicago area, or something very similar. It was back in the late summer of 2000, around this time of the year. There's a park or a dam in a town by the name of Goshen, Indiana, that people frequently visit during the day. A friend of mine lived right near the dam, and sometimes at night, we would head over there and just hang out. One clear night, we decided to take a walk to the dam since there was a full moon out. And it was really bright out, so we figured why not. We walked to the dam, which was about a 5-minute walk, and once you get to the dam area, there's a long path along the top of the lake that you have to walk to get to the end where the dam starts at. We were walking like normal, just talking and looking at the sky, when we approached the end of the area. There's some steps that go down to the bottom of the dam. That's usually where people like to go to fish. Anyway, we hear this loud rumbling, like the rocks moving like crazy down below. We were like, what the heck is that noise? What's going on down there? And all of a sudden, we hear this whoosh. It was something similar to the whoosh you would hear from a pterodactyl in a Jurassic Park movie. That's the only way I can describe the sound. It flew right at the edge of the dam, but it was too dark to clearly see it. What we did see was the outline before it swooped in the moonlight. I remember feeling the intense rush of air from its flap. And I've seen a lot of birds growing up in the country and traveling to all kinds of nature parks. And this was no ordinary bird. It had a scary similar resemblance to the creeper in mid-flight with its wings in the movie Jeepers Creepers. But that wasn't the scary part. Not more than 3 whooshes from its wings. We hear the brush behind us that leads to the woods move around. Then, we hear this loud bang. Someone was shooting at it. We bolted out of there as fast as we could, sprinting back towards the parking lot at the end of the dam. And that's when we heard this loud crash on the opposite side of the lake, where we think the creature landed. We got back to my friend's house and we heard police sirens. We didn't go back out, but we went the next day to see what crashed on the opposite side. There were huge broke tree branches, but nothing else. A man was outside walking around the area, and he said he lives nearby and heard something that sounded like a plane crash in the trees. But there was no sign of anything but broken trees. My friend and I talk about that thing every time we see each other. His uncle witnessed something like that in 2002 in the South Bend area. But the real question is, who was shooting at it? That's what's bugged me the most all these years. But yeah, when I hear stories like that, it really makes you think of all the other things that are out there. This past Sunday, I was part of a live online alien experiencers chat session, Lon Strickler said. I had mentioned phantoms and monsters and was discussing some of my work. One of the participants, who happened to live in Milwaukee, asked about winged humanoids and mentioned that he had a sighting in 2001. He was unaware of the Chicago area and recent Wisconsin sightings. So, I asked the witness to call me after the session. I'll refer to the witness as AD. AD called me a few hours later. He stated that the sighting occurred on June 21st, 2001, at a boat docking facility on the Kinnickinnick River. It's located at 1933 South 1st Street, about 1 mile west of Milwaukee Bay, on Lake Michigan. AD and 2 friends were taking a sailboat out of dry dock. It was early afternoon. As he looked up at the mast, he noticed a winged flying object just east of his location. AD is a military veteran, so this sighting was quite confusing. It was a clear sky, so he was able to see some detail, and he also stated that it was hard to judge the altitude of this object. As he watched, he began to distinguish more detail, and soon realized that this was not a craft. It was apparent that this was a quote-unquote man with wings, and it was quite large. He estimates the huge bat-like wings were approximately 30 feet from tip to tip, and were attached to the hips. The body, which was entirely medium brown, was about 10 feet in length, with a head that had no neck, and seemed to be a part of the upper torso. The arms were attached to the wings and there were no legs, but instead, there was a notched structure in the back. The winged being never flapped its wings, only simply glided. The most interesting aspect to this wing being was that it disappeared twice, then reappeared during the short time that AD and his friends observed it. AD had a pair of binoculars handy and briefly watched the best that he could, since the being flew about quickly. At the end, it vanished out of sight, which amazed the 3 eyewitnesses. AD said that he had the sense that it knew that we were watching it. A woman claims that in 2001, she had a sighting of 4 winged humanoids in Berwyn, Illinois. She disclosed her sighting to investigator Tobias Wayland. In 2001, we were in my backyard, which is next to Cicero, just outside of Chicago. We were having a picnic in the backyard. It was about 9 or 10 o'clock at night. Now, it scares me to talk about this because I don't want to bring bad juju on myself. I was in the backyard cleaning up and I look up in the air. It was a beautiful moonlit night, just a couple days before 9/11. And the moon's out, but it's kind of cloudy. I've got tiki torches in the backyard and those really big balls that light up like half a block. I'm by myself outside, cleaning and gathering stuff off of the table, and I see 4 humongous, they looked humongous, people. I mean, they looked like men. They were all black and they had big wings, and I mean, huge wings. The wings were not feathery, they were bat wings, or demon wings. I looked at them, and there were 4 in a row, and they looked like they were standing up horizontally as they flew away. They were muscular. They were big. The witness offered that she's, quote-unquote, sensitive, in the sense of having a natural affinity for psychic phenomena. I've got these weird gifts. They've always been really scary to me. I never understood them, she said. I found out after years of therapy and talking to priests that I'm blessed, and you can either learn to use it or suppress it. I chose to suppress it because it's scary. The 4 didn't hear me. They were too high up to hear me, but 2 of them looked directly at me. And when they looked at me, they had red eyes. I freaked out because they looked directly into my eyes. I ran into my house and I was starting to cry because I was freaking out. My cousin, who has since passed away, said, "What's wrong? What happened? What's the matter?" But I was too afraid to speak. I just wanted to go back outside to make sure they were gone. I went out there and they were. They never came back. I was afraid for weeks after that to go outside. Like many witnesses, she shared her experience with only a few people, only to be mocked. Still, she stands by her story. This was not my imagination. I don't do drugs and I don't drink. This blew my mind, completely blew my mind. I told some people at work, but of course they laughed at me. They taunted me, thought I was crazy. To this day, I know what I saw. I won't let anyone try to manipulate my story or tell me I was hallucinating, she said. My son, who's 32, said to me, "Mom, this is really odd, but did you ever think that 9/11 happened right after you saw those things?" I said, "No, I'd never thought of that." He said, "You saw 4 of them, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Right in front of each other, like perfectly aligned. And they were huge with humongous wings. They were out to do something. You could tell they were on a mission. You got the Twin Towers, you've got the Pentagon, you've got Flight 93 that crashed in a field." I said, "Oh my God, I never thought of that. I never ever thought of that." She said of the possible correspondences. Many believe that sightings of Mothman, as red-eyed winged creatures are often called, are portents of tragedy, although this belief is contested within the paranormal community. "I never even knew Mothman existed. Never heard any of the stories," she said. "There's a lot of stuff I never dabbled in. Ever. Which is scary because you've got nobody to talk to, and you're afraid to talk to people. You're afraid to say what you've seen. I never called the police. I was so scared." So there you have it, people. Mothman did 9/11. Mothman. You silly little boy. Back in December of 2001, our apartment completely burned down, and we lost everything. The company my father worked for ended up paying for a fully furnished apartment until ours was rebuilt. At this point in time, we lived in Madison, Wisconsin, more specifically on Allied Drive, but that place burned down. So, we were sent to a place right off of the Seminole Highway exit, off of the Beltline Highway. In January of 2002, about 2 weeks after our fire, my mom got off at our exit and turned left. As we were coming up to the second set of lights, my mom saw what she believed to be a large bat-like creature. She said that it was very opaque in color. Details were harder to make out because it was evening when this happened. It was very large, and she said that as she turned her head to look at this thing, it turned and looked at her. She believed she made direct eye contact with it. Its eyes were glowing red, and the face was very bat-like from what she could see. It was flying, but it wasn't flapping its wings like a normal bat would. Instead, it was almost gliding, kind of. I don't know how else to explain it. It had been flying the opposite direction that we were going. She tried to get a better look, but it was gone as soon as it appeared. I was in the car when this happened. I didn't see what she did, but I do remember my mom screaming and panicking. A few weeks had gone by, and we were back in our original apartment. Our basement had one laundry machine and one dryer that I can remember, and it was directly across from our storage unit. After moving back into the rebuilt apartment, my mom decided she was going to do laundry and went downstairs. As she was doing the laundry, though, for whatever reason, she decided to turn around and look into her storage unit. After a minute, she noticed something at the very back wall, behind all of our junk. As she focused more on what exactly she was seeing, she believes that she saw the very same creature. She saw a large bat-like face with the same red glowing eyes. She said it had been staring back at her. She completely panicked and ran as fast as she could back upstairs, and she never went back down there again. We moved out of there soon after that happened. About 2 or 3 days after her second incident with seeing this creature, she said she saw a few news reports on sightings of a creature very similar to what she had seen. My mom and I, over the years, have done our best to do research into this, and we have tried very hard to find these articles and reports on these sightings. But for whatever reason, it seems like they were completely removed, almost as if no one wants these reports going public. I stumbled across something that someone had once posted, and I had a feeling they would be able to assist me in finding answers. My mom almost never talks about it because people never believe her. But we know what happened, and we know we aren't the only ones. But we can't seem to find anything regarding this. I was 6 years old at the time. My mom was the one who witnessed everything firsthand. I just remember the fear and the paranoia when she saw what she saw in the basement. I mean, she never set foot in the basement again. She wouldn't even go and stand on the stairwell. I remember some people in my family would sit there and kind of make fun of her, and some of them didn't believe her. They would say, "Hey, Heather, go grab the sled from the storage unit." Mom would just look at them and say, "No," and walk away. Everyone thought it was the funniest thing, but it traumatized my mom to this day. She'll bring it up occasionally, but she doesn't talk about it that much, because most people don't believe her. Although, I think my dad believed her, honestly. The first time that she saw it, we were on the bridge, by the exit. If I remember correctly, I had a toy or was drinking a drink or something. My attention was down towards the floor, and I just remember the car kind of slowed down pretty drastically, and my mom screamed and she said, "What the fuck was that?" She freaked out, and when I looked up, I saw her head was turned, and she looked like she'd seen a ghost. She didn't tell me what she saw right away. She was just in shock. A few weeks later, when she saw in the storage unit in our apartment, the apartment had been restored and we were able to move back in. My mom had gone downstairs to do the laundry, and I don't remember if she told me that she had this feeling that she had to look or if she just wanted to look. I don't really know why she looked behind her in the storage unit, but she did. And after a minute, she noticed a face. And when she looked closer, she said that it looked almost exactly like the face of the thing that she had seen on the bridge. What really got to her were the red eyes. She said to this day the red eyes that she saw are burned in her memory. She will never forget the look in the eyes, and she said that it's just something she'll never forget. The eyes are what really terrified her. Almost everyone in that building who was open to the paranormal really thought the building was haunted. I do remember a few instances where we would hear a baby crying. I mean, at the time my brother was an infant, so my parents would go to check on him, and he would be dead asleep, and they would still hear a baby crying. It was constant. it was almost non-stop. Some nights, they would hear all of the dishes flying out of the cabinets and crashing on the floor, and they would think that we had an intruder, and yet everything was untouched. It was like nothing even happened. The activity really started getting worse when the basement started getting redone, because they were doing something in the basement. The activity started picking up after that, and the apartment fire happened soon after. I remember soon after the building itself was rebuilt after the fire. My aunt and uncle had been living in the upstairs unit above us, and I remember being in their apartment once, and my aunt was braiding my hair, and I went downstairs because she was going to jump in the shower. They always had a decorative candle on their table. My family's Mexican, so they had those religious decorative candles, and they had one in the center of their coffee table. They didn't really light them up at that point in time. They never had a reason to. So, like I said, I went downstairs, my aunt was in the shower, my uncle was in the bedroom, and when my aunt got out of the shower, she noticed that the entire apartment was full of smoke. She thought, oh my God, there's another fire. And it was the candle. But the candle itself had set itself on fire. It wasn't lit. It had just been on fire. It was in the center of the table, and it even left a charred circle where it had been. Me and my mom, over the years, whenever we do bring it up, we do our best to look into it. We've just never really gotten anywhere. This time around, I was really determined to find something. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just know that, to this day, it really bothers my mom, and I want to try to get her some type of answer. On the evening of January 1st, 2000, a witness and her son were traveling on Spring Creek Road in Rockford, Illinois. As they approached Rock Creek, they both observed a large diamond-shaped craft hovering above the creek. The craft was brightly lit, and there was a distinct beam of light coming from the bottom towards the creek. She slowed the car, and the craft suddenly cut off the beam. At the same time, the craft slowly ascended into the night sky. The witness and her son had lingering dreams after the incident, and both started to notice paranormal activity around them. And then, on an October night in 2002, 2 years later, at around 8 p.m., she was driving again on Spring Creek Road near Rock Creek. She observed a winged shape approaching her head-on. By the time this flying anomaly got near her, it swooped up and over the car. The witness stated that the winged being was humanoid in shape, with two leg-like structures trailing below it. The wingspan was so wide that it literally blocked out all the streetlights. She estimates that it was 6 feet in height, black in color, and had large wings, approximately 12 feet in total width. She immediately stopped the car, got out, and looked down the road behind her. This winged being had vanished, but she noticed that the trees were moving as if a huge gust of wind had gone through them. She also stated that the being never flapped its wings. It seemed to be propelled by an unknown force. The witness claims to have experienced a sense of consternation and anxiety ever since the incident, even though she now lives in Tennessee. About 15 years ago, my son, who was about 12, told me a story one day after I picked him up from his after-school friend's house. They lived right by a creek, and the boys always walked down the road to the creek to play in it. One afternoon, about 3:30, 4 o'clock, when the sun is still high in the sky but starting its descent, so it's a little blinding in the eyes, they were walking down the road to the bridge over the creek when they noticed a man standing on the road. Now, this is from the mouth of a 12-year-old. He said this man was just standing there, looked like he was all in black, and he said it looked like the man didn't have a neck. They were a little puzzled but kept walking toward it. He said that's when it opened up its arms straight out, and it appeared to have wings. At that time, he said it just flapped them one time, like his arms went down one time, and he said it took off straight up in the air. They tried to see where it went, but said the sun was in their eyes. I didn't know what to think at the time, but just dismissed it as young boys and their stories. When I started working nights, about 11 years ago, I started listening to Coast to Coast AM, and I realized he had possibly seen the Mothman. Then he told me when he was in his early 20s, he was hanging out with some friends from a surrounding small town. They were telling stories, and one of the guys started talking about seeing this giant flying bird man. And it's the very same area where my son saw it. They were both excited to meet someone else that had seen what they had seen. This occurred near Panther Creek in Auburn, Illinois. I recently learned of the Chicago humanoid sightings, and then about the black-winged humanoid sighting near Rockford, Illinois. This was shocking to me because I live in Winnebago County, that borders Rockford and is 60 miles from Chicago, and I have seen a similar black-winged being. I was standing on the deck in my backyard late one summer evening. It was August of 2004. I was stargazing as I often do, when I was startled by the sudden furious barking of a neighbor's dogs. As I turned and looked towards the direction of the barking, it was at that moment I saw an all-black 7-foot-in-length man with huge bat-like wings flying across the park that borders along my backyard. It then descended to approximately 5 to 6 feet above ground. It pulled or folded its wings in slightly, and then glided along the paved path that runs through the park. It continued gliding through an easement between two houses, disappearing from my sight. Stunned by what I had just seen, I quickly ran in through the back door and out the front. I stepped out onto the front porch, and that's when I heard a loud screeching sound. The sound was so loud, and was coming from the thick tree line across the street from the park, on yet another easement. I quickly stepped back into the house, shut and locked the door, and I woke my sleeping husband. I asked him to come listen to what I was hearing. I told him what happened and what I saw on our way towards the living room window, as the tree line could be seen from there. The screeching continued sporadically for approximately 5 minutes, and then it went silent. The afternoon of the following day, after the incident, as I was walking to the mailbox, the elderly neighbor who resided in the house that the tree-lined easement borders the backyard yelled across the street, asking if I had a minute to take a look at something strange in his backyard. What the neighbor showed me was his chain-link fence posts were bent down at a 45-degree angle. He was perplexed as to what could have possibly caused this to happen. I attempted to explain to him what it was that I saw and heard the night before, just as I went into detail that I saw something very large and strange flying. I got a raised eyebrow with the look of, "Are you crazy?" and was told that what I saw was a heron, and that no bird could have bent those posts like that. So, I quickly dropped the subject. As I walked back home, another neighbor 2 houses away yelled, "Hey, did you hear all that loud noise last night? It woke me up. I thought the rainforest or something moved in overnight." To which I just replied, "Yeah, I heard. Not a clue as to what it was." I researched for a few months after my encounter, and found out that there was quite a bit about Mothman sightings. However, nothing out there matched what I saw that night. So, as time went by, it had become all but a faded memory over the years until now. First of all, I would like to thank you for your sight. Here, I don't feel ridiculed for telling my story. And even if I am, I don't care what the skeptics think. I know what I saw, and it is the truth. In July 2006, on the 15th or 16th, my husband and I were in the process of moving from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to a small area between Whitewater and Eagle, Wisconsin. It was about 9:30 p.m., and there was a bright full moon and a clear sky. We were traveling down Highway 59 East, past Eagle, turning onto Road X, a somewhat desolate stretch. A thin band of trees on each side of the road with open field behind them. This area is about 18 miles approximately east of Whitewater, located between Eagle and North Prairie, Wisconsin. My husband was driving, his 2 young children in the back seat, I believe were asleep, suddenly swooping over the trees on our left, lowering down in front of the car windshield, then upwards again over the treetops to our right, gliding at a slow ascent over the field, was what I would describe as a man with bat-like features, flying like a bat. This creature was as real as you and I. We had a very close-up look at it. It was long, 6 to 7 feet in length. I say length because it was flying sideways, looking into the car, much like doing the side stroke. It was a dark gray, very leathery skin. One wing kind of tucked into its side, the one facing the ground, and the other flapping while it flew. The wing was huge and exactly like a bat's. And what got me the most were the eyes. They were very round. Where the whites would be, looked roomy, is the best way to describe it. The irises were of a very pale blue. I wasn't afraid. I was astounded, amazed, and even excited. My husband was shook up and would not stop when I asked him to. I hope this will also bring more people forward who have seen this mystery creature, or other creatures as well. I was reading recently online of a woman who, in about 1960, also had seen a creature of this description. I noticed that some who have witnessed this compare it to the creature from the movie Jeepers Creepers. There are definitely similarities, but I have yet to see the movie prior to my sighting. I recently received a telephone call from an eyewitness who stated that he and his son observed a caped-winged humanoid in Bensenville, Illinois, said Lon Strickler. The eyewitness's neighbor has a large pine tree in the adjacent yard. Both Brian and his son were looking in that direction when a large dark being quickly dropped to the ground and grabbed a squirrel with its talons. The squirrel was literally screaming during the attack. The dark being then quickly jettisoned up into the tree, and both witnesses could hear the being moving up the tree, but neither caught sight of it again. Brian described the humanoid as having strong and grasshopper-like legs, with muscular thighs. It seemed to have cape-like wings that were wrapped around the body. These wings were never unfurled. He estimated the height of the humanoid at 6 feet or so. There was no distinct head or eyes, but the overall size and form was too large to be any bird that the longtime Bensenville resident has ever seen or heard described in his area. Both witnesses were shocked at what they had seen. I asked about getting a photo, but I was told that the event happened so quickly that they never had a chance to do so. Like many witnesses, Brian shared his story after finding out that others had reported something similar. The witness decided to come forward after his elderly mother in Wisconsin read about the Chicago sightings and urged him to contact me, said Lon Strickler. This account has special significance, according to Strickler, who said, "I believe that this is the first report to definitely state that one of these winged humanoids actually attacked an animal. This is also one of the better descriptions of the legs and talons on these beings." I'm originally from Muncie, Indiana, and I grew up spending a lot of time at Prairie Creek because my family has a boat there. It was summer 2007 when we had taken a boat ride and watched a sunset. It was dusk and the sun was setting as we approached our dock. As we got closer, my friend and I both saw what looked like a human standing at the end of our dock. We thought it was strange because there's no one else around. Our neighboring boats were all docked. There were no other cars around, and etc. We were the only one out that evening from our dock area. This human thing then turned around, and we saw its glowing yellowish eyes. At this point, we were freaked out wondering what this was because there was something totally off about it, and it was clearly not a normal human. Then, as we got even closer, it spread its wings, flapped a few times, and soared up into the sky. It was way too big to be a bird. I've never seen anything like it before or after. It was probably around 5 to 6 feet tall and really dark. The whole body and wings were gray, if not black. In July 2008, I was picked up from O'Hare International Airport in Chicago at night by my husband and a friend of ours. We lived in Iowa at the time. We would usually head back to Iowa via Highway 20 towards Belvedere and Rockford, but we took a different road. I don't remember which one. I think our GPS device was taking us on an alternate route to avoid some construction. We tried navigating to get back towards Belvedere and Rockford, and we were driving on a 2-lane highway outside the suburbs, and there were crop fields on either side of the road, so it was semi-rural. I was looking off to the left and saw a winged creature fly above the crops on the left side, and fly straight across the road several yards in front of us. It disappeared over the field on the right side of the road. It had a wingspan of several feet. I did not see what the body looked like. The other people in the car saw it, but said it was just a large bat. But it was much larger than a bat. The way it flew was more like a large bird, like an eagle, but it was gray and black. According to the witness, the winged creature was somewhat well illuminated by the car's headlights, due to its low altitude and it only being several yards ahead of their vehicle. It wasn't high in the sky at all. This was something that was very low. I was able to see the basic shape of it in the wings. It was about human-sized, maybe smaller than 6 feet, he explained. The wings were maybe the length of a human's arms, but a bit wider, maybe 5 to 6 feet. I could only see the color gray on it, a sort of medium to light gray. I couldn't see anything reflecting off of it, or anything. It was a gray, dull shade. It was over the crops on the left side, and then it went over the road, and was over the crops on the right side, and then it was gone. I saw a body shape, like a human-type shape, human proportions basically. Then the wings were the main things that I saw. I couldn't believe it. I've never seen wings on something flying that big. I've seen eagles flying and stuff like that, and eagles are pretty big, but this was bigger than an eagle. My husband said it was a bat, and I was like, there are no bats that large in the Midwest. It was something that just sort of glided. It didn't fly like a bat, but it had wings that were sort of bat-like. However, he said, the wings did look more like a bat's wings than a bird's wings. I didn't see feathers or anything. It didn't seem very bulky to me. It just seemed sort of thin. It was able to move quickly from one side of the road to the other over the crops. And it didn't have a trajectory like a bat, where they can be flitty and move around quickly. It looked like it was gliding, sort of like you were looking at an eagle or something. It was just something we saw for a few seconds. When asked to compare his sighting to photos of a great blue heron, the witness said, I feel like there was just more of it perpendicular to the wings. There was a long body, and I do not remember seeing a long beak. I would say the wingspan is pretty similar to what I saw, but the wing shape was a bit more formidable. There was more width, and the wings went farther back. All 3 people in the car were surprised by what they'd seen, and although he was momentarily afraid, he was more generally shocked by the sighting, feelings exasperated by not really knowing where they were. The witness went on to explain that, although he had always known about and read about unexplained mysteries, it was a recent move to Mineral Point, Wisconsin, that prompted him to report his sighting. He began to see reports associated with the Lake Michigan MOTHMAN investigation, shared in local Facebook groups, and decided he should come forward with his own experience. I never forgot what I saw 12 years ago, he said. It was very unusual. It was a strange thing to see. I'm 29 years old. I've lived in Racine, Wisconsin pretty much my whole life. I work 3rd shift and I get pretty bored, so tonight I decided to Google monster legends and sightings in Wisconsin. One of the links was to a Phantoms and Monsters article about a gargoyle sighting in 2019, and then other sightings in the Chicago O'Hare International Airport and surrounding areas, and a more recent one in August of this year. I was so happy and excited to see these reports, because one night, back in August of 2008, while I was living in the Lake Park neighborhood of Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin, my mom, my cousin, and I were having a bonfire. As we were talking, I just happened to lean back in my chair, and I looked up at the smoke going into the sky, and as soon as I did, I saw a big gray humanoid creature with big wings fly through the smoke and off into the darkness. I had my eyes fixed on it for a good 7 to 10 seconds, and saw 2 legs and arms, but I was unable to get a good look at its head or face. I didn't know what it was that I saw, but I knew for certain it wasn't a bird, or an owl, or anything natural that I had ever seen before. I kept it to myself for fear of being ridiculed or people thinking I was crazy, but I was so happy to see these articles and reports from people out here in my area, seeing potentially the same thing. Hopefully, more people who have had similar experiences will see your articles and come forward to share, and maybe one day, someone will actually capture this thing on camera. Pretty fucking unlikely.